Hi Whovians, Harry here, and in the most recent episode of Doctor Who, The Well, there was the return of a old Doctor Who monster, the Midnight Entity, that first appeared in Series 4 of Doctor Who, of course in the episode Midnight, and we got some new information about the Midnight Entity. So in this video I am going to be going over everything so far about this monster, and maybe we can explain what it is. But before we get into that, don't forget to subscribe, also leave a like and comment down below, and let's get in to the video. So I am just going to be calling this monster the Midnight Entity because even though it was credited in in The Well as the thing with no name, it is most commonly known by the fanbase as the Midnight Entity, so that's just what I'm going to be calling it throughout this video. But, of course, the Midnight Entity first appeared in the episode Midnight, and if you just need a quick little plot refresher on that, is that the Doctor and Donna are on this planet Midnight, and the Doctor goes on this kind of like bus tour, and he is with all these other people, and then the shuttle like breaks down, and the Midnight Entity comes to the shuttle bus thing, and it knocks on the door, copying the Doctor, knocking back at it, and then it eventually breaks in without tearing the ship wide open, apart from tearing out the driver's cabin, so the driver and the mechanic die. But it manages to get in there, it possesses Skye, and then it manages to like kind of freeze the Doctor, with the Midnight Entity taking his voice, and the hostess realizes that the entity who is like in control of Skye has taken the Doctor's voice, and the Doctor is now just repeating the Midnight Entity. The hostess realizes this and manages to throw the Midnight Entity out back onto the extonic rays of, so it throws them back onto the planet, presumably to die again, but it survived out there before, and of course it then appears in this episode of The Well, which takes place 400,000 years after the episode Midnight, and the Midnight Entity is still alive. Of course, the quick little plot refresher of The Well is that the Doctor and Belinda join this crew because they are sent there to either see if there's any survivors, and if there's not, then they nuke this planet. But they do find Alice, who is, who we learn later in the episode, is taken over by the Midnight Entity. A lot of the crew ends up dying. Fortunately, though, the Doctor manages to get the Midnight Entity off Alice, and then they manage to escape. However, just before they escape, the Midnight Entity attaches itself on Belinda. Then Shia wounds Belinda. The entity jumps on her, and then Shia sacrifices herself, kills herself, in the hope that it can at least stop the Midnight Entity from escaping. And then it is hinted at the end of this episode that maybe it attached on Mo, one of the other officers of this crew in this episode. But, of course, with those plot summaries out of the way, what did we learn about this entity? Well, let's first go over what we learned in Midnight, which was the first appearance of, this planet and this entity. So, the Midnight Entity is seen to have a physical form. The mechanic spots like a shadow in the distance heading towards the shuttle that they are on. But, and it manages to kill the driver and, of course, the mechanic. And it comes to the shuttle, and it bangs on the outside of the shuttle, repeating what the Doctor was banging from the inside of the shuttle, and it manages to breach its way into the shuttle without damaging it or without ripping it open. So it can like walk through or get through solid surfaces, and this is a really, really solid surface because this was to obviously keep the people on this planet safe, because nothing can stand the extonic sunlight, but of course this midnight entity can. And of course when it is in the shuttle, it takes over this woman's sky, and it repeats what the Doctor and all the other passengers are saying, and eventually it moves on to speaking at the exact same time with them, without any delay, and then eventually it speaks first, speaking over, in this in the episode Midnight, it being the Doctor, and then that moves into the next point, that it can actually take over other people, of course in the episode Midnight being the Doctor, while staying in a different person's body, of course in the episode Midnight being Sky. And the reason that this entity actually it gets stopped is because it takes the voice of the person that they have like overtaken. Of course in the episode Midnight it was the Doctor's voice, and the hostess realises this, causing them to get ejected out back onto the surface of Midnight, but it takes over the voice of the Doctor as well. However, so we know from the episode Midnight that it speaks at the same time, and then eventually it takes over while possessing multiple people and also taking the voice of a certain person. However, in The Well, it is quite different. So, in the episode The Well, we get more information that in The Well, it kills people if they're standing directly behind the possessed person, the person that the Midnight entity is inhabiting. So it kills them if they are stood directly behind, maybe as some sort of defense system that it has evolved and learnt through its time from when we first saw it in the episode Midnight. And also it has some sort of life signal, because towards the end of the episode The Well, they are trying to escape, of course, while trying to leave the Midnight entity behind. However, Shire sends two of her officers in with Alice to get them away. So that should be 3 people in the airlock, but there are 4 life signs when those 2 officers and Alice are escaping. So is the midnight entity still on her, and it has some sort of life signal that is registered there? And also, even though it has some sort of life signal, it has no heartbeat, because when they find Alice, there is only 1 heartbeat registered. So it obviously has some sort of life sign, but no heartbeat. And also, unlike in Midnight, where we didn't really see it at all, it can be seen whilst in the person that it is inhabiting. And unlike Midnight, where it just seemed to want to have fun, according to the Doctor, it seems to want to leave this planet, as Alice really wants to leave the planet, and if the Midnight entity is still on her at the end, it is more than happy and it wants to leave the planet Midnight as well. So it wants to leave Midnight, which is something new that we didn't know in the previous episode, Midnight. But something we learn from both episodes, being Midnight and The Well, is that the Midnight entity is basically immortal, because we learn that it can survive galvanic radiation, which is the radiation from that the planet Midnight is emitting, not only in the episode Midnight, but also in the episode The Well. And also, it is immortal in its longevity as well, because the Well takes place 400,000 years after the episode Midnight, which means that it has survived an incredibly long amount of time. And if it wants to get off-world, it can probably survive loads and loads of other environments. Not just that it thrives under galvanic radiation, and also, of course, in the bases and the shuttle, there was no radiation inside there, yet it still survived. Also, the Midnight entity we learn from both appearances has a physical appearance. We see, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that it is pointed out by the mechanic that he saw a shadow on the surface of the diamond planet of Midnight. So there's obviously something out there. And then, of course, in the episode The Well, we see that there is something behind Alice. So, obviously it has its own appearance, and also in the behind the scenes footage in Doctor Who Unleashed, we do get an actual costume for the Midnight entity, but my explanation for that is that it's not actually a canon appearance of what the Midnight entity looks like, but it's just something for the actors to, like, act off. So it's something for them to react to, rather than them having to use their imagination. But we do get an actual physical appearance in the behind the scenes, but I think that's not actually what its canon appearance looks like, if it even does have a real physical appearance rather than just a shadow. Also, the entity has a voice, because it is mentioned not only in the episode The Well that the Doctor says that it is whispering to him, but in the episode Midnight, Sky, who is possessed at this point, frames the Doctor's voice as the voice in their head. So obviously the Midnight entity is talking to all of them, but just in the episode Midnight, the entity was trying to frame it as the Doctor's voice. And of course, it can possess multiple people at once. We saw that in the episode Midnight with it possessing the Doctor and Sky at the same time, and in the episode The Well, it possesses potentially Alice and Belinda at the same time, and if not Belinda, the Officer Mo at the same time as Alice, so it can possess multiple people at the same time. And throughout both of these appearances, you can just see that the monster, the Midnight entity, is having fun. This is more speculative than the other points, but you can see that definitely in the episode Midnight that is having fun. The Doctor brings it up again in the episode The Well that the Midnight entity was having fun, but also that, well, it seems to be just having a pretty good time as it has escaped from Midnight, which is what it wanted in this episode. So, just to recap, the Midnight entity is basically immortal. Not only in longevity, but it can survive in almost any habitat, including radiation-filled, habitats. The Midnight entity maybe has a physical appearance as well as it having a voice of its own. It likes to possess people, but also it can kill people as well if they stand behind it. It is obviously incredibly intelligent and incredibly strong, whilst also being subtle when it needs to be. And, of course, it can overtake people when it whispers to them, but it can also just survive in people who cannot hear it, of course being Elise, who was deaf, and that was the only reason why she potentially survived her possession from the Midnight entity. But, of course, that is just my thoughts. I don't know if we'll ever truly find out what the Midnight entity fully was, and I think that is probably for the best. But let me know down in the comments below, what do you think the Midnight entity is? Also, did you like the episode Midnight? Would you have preferred that if this wasn't a sequel to Midnight? As I said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, also subscribe, and share it out. I will see you in the next one.